They called him the greatest threat Rome ever faced. Not a king with armies, not a general with legions, a slave, a gladiator. A man who turned chains into weapons and transformed Rome's greatest shame into its darkest nightmare. This is Spartacus, the man who made an empire tremble. 70,000 slaves followed him. 6 Roman armies fell before him. And when Rome finally crushed his revolution, they lined the Appian Way with 6,000 crosses as a warning. But his story didn't end there. It echoed through centuries, inspiring every rebellion, every uprising, every soul who refused to kneel. Because Spartacus proved something terrifying to every tyrant who ever lived, that the oppressed, when united, when driven by desperation and hope, can shake the foundations of even the mightiest empire. His name became a battle cry, his legend immortal. But how did a single slave spark a revolution that nearly destroyed Rome? What transformed a gladiator into a military genius who humiliated the Republic's finest commanders? And why, after 2,000 years, does his defiance still echo in our modern world? The answer lies not in his victories, but in his choice. The moment he decided that death in battle was better than life in chains. By the final page, you'll understand why Rome erected 6,000 crosses and still couldn't kill what Spartacus had become. The iron collar bit into his neck as the slave traders dragged him through Capua's dusty streets. Spartacus kept his head high, though blood dried on his wrists where the manacles had cut deep. Around him, Roman citizens pointed and laughed at the captured Thracian warrior, this barbarian from beyond the empire's edges. They saw a defeated animal. They didn't see the storm gathering behind his eyes. Months ago, he'd fought for the Roman auxiliary forces, his skill with the curved sickle blade earning grudging respect from legionaries who normally despised foreign troops. But when he'd refused an unjust order, when he'd stood against corruption within the ranks, Rome's gratitude evaporated. Desertion, they called it. Rebellion. The punishment was swift and merciless, from soldier to slave in a single day. His wife, a prophetess from his homeland, had warned him in dreams, chains first, then blood, then freedom written in fire across Italian skies. He'd dismissed her visions as fever dreams. Now, standing before the gates of Lentulus Batiatus's gladiator school, those prophecies felt like iron certainty. The lanista, a fat merchant who traded in human death, circled Spartacus like a butcher examining livestock. He squeezed the Thracian's arms, checking muscle density. Examined his teeth, ensuring good health for maximum profit. Spartacus remained still, but his mind catalogued everything: the positions of guards, the weak points in the compound walls, the rhythms of the training yard visible through the gate. This merchant saw profit. Spartacus saw opportunity. The school held 70 gladiators, men from across the empire, Gauls with their wild hair and fierce hearts, Germans towering like oak trees, Thracians like himself who remembered freedom's taste, all shackled, all waiting for death in the arena, but also all warriors, all desperate, all dangerous. Batiatus smiled, gold teeth glinting in the Mediterranean sun, unaware he'd just purchased the fuse that would ignite Rome's greatest nightmare. Inside the looters, hell wore the mask of discipline. Dawn broke with the crack of whips, driving gladiators from their cells into the training yard where sand mixed with yesterday's blood. Spartacus learned the savage arithmetic of arena combat. Each victory purchased another week of life. Each defeat bought oblivion. The doctors, veteran gladiators turned trainers, taught with brutal efficiency. Block with the shield, thrust with the gladius, never waste movement, never show mercy. The crowd demands spectacle, they bark, but we demand you survive. Because every gladiator who died meant lost investment for Batiatus. Spartacus adapted quickly, his military training merging with the gladiator's art. Where others fought with desperate fury, he fought with cold calculation. He studied his opponent's patterns, exploited their weaknesses, turned their strength into fatal overconfidence. In the practice bouts, he dominated. When Batiatus finally sent him into the arena, the Capua crowd roared their approval as the Thracian dispatched 3 opponents in quick succession, his sickle blade weaving patterns of death that seemed almost beautiful in their precision. But each victory hollowed him further. Each time he stood over a dying man, their eyes meeting in that final moment, he saw not an enemy but a brother in chains. These men weren't his true opponents. Rome was. The entire corrupt system that ground human beings into entertainment for bored patricians, that transformed warriors into performing animals, that treated life as commodity to be bought and sold. Night after night, as he lay chained in his cell, Spartacus began to plan, not escape, something far more dangerous: revolution. He whispered to other gladiators during training, his words carefully chosen, never too obvious, always deniable. "Brothers, we outnumber our guards. We're trained killers. They keep us docile with the promise of survival, but we're dying anyway, just slowly, one arena appearance at a time. What if we chose a quick death fighting for freedom over a slow death fighting for their amusement?" The seeds of rebellion took root in fertile soil. The moment arrived on an ordinary spring morning in 73 BCE. Batiatus had grown careless, confident that fear and discipline kept his human properties subdued. But Spartacus had been counting guards, timing patrols, noting when the armory doors stood unattended. The spark that ignited the revolution was almost absurdly simple: a disagreement over training conditions that escalated into confrontation. When guards moved to punish the protesters, Spartacus struck. He'd smuggled kitchen implements into the training yard over weeks, hiding knives and cleavers in the sand, passing them to trusted allies. Now those improvised weapons flashed in the morning light as 70 gladiators erupted into coordinated chaos. The guards, accustomed to individual compliance, fell before the organized fury of men who'd trained their entire lives for combat. Spartacus's tactical mind transformed a prison break into a military operation. While some gladiators seized the armory, grabbing real weapons, others secured the gates, preventing reinforcements from entering. Within minutes, the looters belonged to the rebels. But Spartacus knew this was only the beginning. A successful escape meant nothing if Roman legions hunted them down within days. They needed more fighters, better positions, supplies for a sustained campaign. As the freed gladiators celebrated, drunk on sudden freedom, Spartacus climbed to the highest point of the compound, his eyes scanning the Italian countryside. His military training reasserted itself. Terrain, resources, defensible positions. Mount Vesuvius rose in the distance, its slopes offering natural fortification. "That's where we go," he announced. "That's where we build an army." The other gladiators stared at him like he'd gone mad. "We're free," they argued. "We should scatter, disappear into the countryside, make for the coast and sail home." Spartacus shook his head. "Rome will hunt us individually and crucify us one by one. But if we unite, if we grow strong enough, we become something they can't ignore, can't easily crush. We become a revolution." Not all believed him. Some fled immediately, seeking individual salvation. But most stayed, bound by the charisma and certainty of this Thracian warrior who spoke like a general. They raided Batiatus's stores, armed themselves properly, and began their march toward Vesuvius. Behind them, Capua burned with the news. The gladiators had escaped, and they were led by someone dangerous, someone who thought like a soldier, someone named Spartacus. Mount Vesuvius became their fortress and their symbol. The volcanic slopes, covered in dense vegetation and riddled with caves, offered perfect defensive terrain for men who knew how to fight but lacked siege equipment or cavalry. Spartacus positioned his growing force with tactical precision, placing scouts on high ground, establishing supply lines to sympathetic villages, creating an organized military camp from what could have been a desperate rabble. Word of the escape spread like wildfire through Italy's slave population, and suddenly they came. By the dozens, then by hundreds. Farm slaves who'd spent lifetimes bent in the fields, household servants who'd endured years of casual cruelty, miners who'd seen their brothers die in collapsed shafts, shepherds who knew every mountain pass. They arrived at Vesuvius seeking something Rome had stolen from them: dignity, hope, revenge. Spartacus welcomed them all, but he didn't just accept refugees. He built an army. His military experience became invaluable as he organized the swelling ranks into cohorts, assigned leaders based on merit rather than origin, and established discipline that rivaled Roman legions. Training drills echoed across the mountainside. Men who'd never held weapons learned to fight in formation. Women who'd followed their freed husbands took up support roles, managing supplies, tending wounded, maintaining the camp infrastructure. Children too young to fight served as messengers and scouts, their small size allowing them to slip past Roman patrols unnoticed. Within weeks, Spartacus commanded 3,000 fighters. Within months, that number swelled to 10,000. Rome finally noticed. The Senate, initially dismissive of what they called a bandit problem, dispatched Gaius Claudius Glaber with 3,000 militiamen to crush the uprising. Glaber was no military genius, but he was arrogant and well-connected, the kind of Roman who believed superior civilization guaranteed victory over barbarian slaves. He besieged Vesuvius, confident that starvation would drive the rebels down into his waiting swords. The mountain had only one viable path of descent, and Glaber blocked it with his forces. Tactically, the situation seemed hopeless for Spartacus. But the Thracian had learned something crucial during his time in Roman service. Romans fought by the book, followed established tactics, trusted in their proven methods, and that predictability was a weakness. Spartacus proposed something insane. They'd descend the opposite side of Vesuvius, the sheer cliff face that Glaber had dismissed as impassable. His men thought he'd lost his mind, but Spartacus had noticed the wild vines covering the volcanic rock, thick as a man's arm and strong enough to bear weight. Under cover of darkness, Spartacus's forces wove ropes from the vines, creating makeshift ladders that stretched down the cliff face. One by one, 10,000 rebels descended into the impossible, lowering themselves into the night while Glaber's forces slept, certain their quarry was trapped. By dawn, the entire army had repositioned. While a small force remained at the top, making noise and maintaining the illusion of a besieged encampment, Spartacus led the bulk of his fighters around Glaber's position. The Roman commander awoke to find the slaves attacking from behind, pouring out of terrain he'd declared impassable, hitting his surprised forces from the direction he'd left undefended. The militiamen, undertrained and unprepared for actual combat, broke immediately. Glaber fled, abandoning his men, his supplies, his dignity. Spartacus's victory was total. The rebel army captured Roman weapons, armor, equipment, everything needed to transform slaves into soldiers. More importantly, they'd proven something terrifying. They could outthink Roman commanders, exploit Roman assumptions, turn Roman confidence into Roman defeat. News of the victory echoed across Italy like thunder. In every farm, every mine, every household where slaves labored under the lash, hope ignited. If Spartacus could defeat a Roman army, perhaps freedom wasn't just a dream. Perhaps the impossible could become real. The Senate, embarrassed and angry, dispatched a second force under Publius Varinius, a praetor with actual military experience, and 4,000 legionaries. Varinius pursued Spartacus aggressively, trying to bring the rebels to decisive battle before they could grow stronger. But Spartacus refused to cooperate with Roman expectations. He split his forces, conducting raids across southern Italy, liberating more slaves, capturing more supplies, always staying mobile, never allowing Varinius to corner him. When the praetor divided his own forces to cover more ground, Spartacus struck. He ambushed and destroyed each Roman detachment separately, using superior mobility and local knowledge to achieve overwhelming advantage at each engagement point. Varinius's lieutenant died in one ambush. His second-in-command fell in another. Finally, Spartacus cornered Varinius himself, driving the praetor from the field in such panicked flight that the Roman abandoned his own horse, escaping on foot while his army disintegrated around him. 2 Roman defeats, 2 humiliations, and Spartacus's army now numbered 70,000, a force large enough to threaten actual cities, to challenge Rome itself. The Senate stopped laughing. They started panicking. Southern Italy became Spartacus's kingdom that winter of 73-72 BCE. His army moved like a storm, liberating estates, distributing land to freed slaves, establishing temporary settlements that functioned as free zones beyond Roman control. Spartacus revealed himself as more than just a military commander. He was a visionary leader who understood his followers needed more than revenge. They needed hope for something beyond war. He organized councils where former slaves could speak freely, make decisions about their collective future, experience democracy that Rome reserved only for citizens. He enforced discipline that prohibited looting or unnecessary cruelty, understanding that becoming monsters would validate Rome's propaganda about barbarous slaves. His strategic goals remained clear: build power, gain leverage, force Rome to negotiate terms that would allow his followers to leave Italy safely. Some wanted to march on Rome itself, to burn the Eternal City, to make the oppressors feel the pain they'd inflicted for centuries. But Spartacus urged caution. Rome's full military might, once mobilized, could crush them. Better to remain a persistent threat, forcing terms through fear rather than confrontation. But unity proved difficult to maintain. As the army swelled to include disparate groups with different goals, factions emerged. Crixus, a Gallic gladiator and one of Spartacus's earliest supporters, led 30,000 fighters who wanted blood more than freedom. They dreamed of carving through Italy, destroying every Roman villa, crucifying every patrician they could catch. The philosophical divide came to a head in the spring of 72 BCE. Spartacus proposed marching north, breaking through the Roman defenses, crossing the Alps, allowing his followers to return to their homelands. Gauls to Gaul, Thracians to Thrace, Germans to Germania, once beyond Italy, Rome couldn't touch them. But Crixus and his followers refused. Italy was rich with plunder, fat with targets. Why flee when they were winning? The army split. Spartacus led 40,000 north, while Crixus took 30,000 to continue the war in southern Italy. The division proved fatal for Crixus. The Senate had finally responded appropriately to the threat, appointing both consuls with legionary forces to crush the rebellion. Consul Gellius caught Crixus's army near Mount Garganus. Without Spartacus's tactical genius, the Gallic force fought bravely but conventionally, meeting Roman legions in direct battle. 2/3 of Crixus's 30,000 died. Crixus himself fell fighting, surrounded by Roman swords. When news reached Spartacus, grief and rage warred within him. Crixus had been a brother, a fellow gladiator who'd stood beside him in those first desperate moments of rebellion. To honor his fallen friend, Spartacus did something unprecedented. He organized funeral games, forcing 300 captured Roman soldiers to fight as gladiators, giving them the death they'd sentenced so many to. An arena of revenge where Romans died for entertainment. The northern campaign revealed Spartacus at his strategic peak. With 40,000 fighters, he smashed through Roman resistance like it was paper. Consul Gellius, fresh from his victory over Crixus, intercepted Spartacus's march only to be utterly routed. His legions broke before the rebel assault, disciplined Romans fleeing in disorder as slaves who'd learned military tactics turned Roman formation against itself. The second consul, Lentulus, attempted to block Spartacus's path near the Po River. Spartacus feinted retreat, drew the Roman forces into overextension, then wheeled his army around and annihilated them in a pincer movement that would have impressed Hannibal himself. Both consuls defeated. Roman military prestige shattered, the path to the Alps stood open, freedom within reach. This was the moment. The pivotal decision that would define Spartacus's legacy and seal his fate. His scouts reported the Alpine passes were lightly defended. They could march through, disappear into Germania or Gaul, establish themselves beyond Rome's reach. Many of his followers celebrated, packing their meager possessions, preparing for the journey home. But then something changed. Whether it was pressure from his remaining forces, who were mostly Italian slaves with no homeland to return to, or whether it was his own calculation that Rome would eventually hunt them even beyond the Alps, or whether it was simple pride, Spartacus made the fatal choice. He turned south. Back toward Rome, the decision mystified ancient historians and continues to puzzle modern scholars. Why, with victory in grasp, would he turn back into the trap? Some sources suggest he'd been promised support from Cilician pirates who would transport his army to Sicily, sparking a new rebellion on that crucial grain island. Others claim he believed Rome would never stop hunting him, so better to fight on his terms than constantly flee. Perhaps he'd simply become intoxicated by his string of victories, believing he could actually defeat Rome in its entirety. Or perhaps he understood something darker, that his followers, bloodied and hardened by 2 years of war, couldn't simply return to peaceful life. They'd become wolves, and wolves needed prey. Whatever his reasoning, the southern march proved disastrous. The Senate, terrified that Spartacus might actually threaten Rome itself, abandoned normal protocol. They appointed Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, to command 8 legions with absolute authority. Crassus was no aristocratic general dabbling in military affairs. He was ruthless, calculating, and desperate to restore his reputation after earlier political setbacks. He saw Spartacus not just as a threat to neutralize, but as an opportunity to claim military glory that would elevate him to Caesar's level. Crassus reorganized the demoralized Roman forces with brutal efficiency. When one legion broke during an early engagement, Crassus revived decimation. Every 10th soldier selected by lot and beaten to death by their comrades. The message was clear. Fear me more than you fear the slaves. Crassus pursued Spartacus with methodical determination, refusing to be drawn into the ambushes and tactical traps that had destroyed previous commanders. He avoided direct engagement, instead harassing the rebel army, cutting supply lines, forcing constant movement that wore down the slaves physically and mentally. When Spartacus attempted to cross into Sicily, the Cilician pirates betrayed him, taking his payment but refusing to honor their agreement to transport his forces. The rebellion's strategic options collapsed. Spartacus found himself trapped in the toe of Italy, Crassus's legions blocking escape to the north, the sea providing no avenue for flight. Still, he fought with characteristic brilliance. When Crassus constructed a 40-mile wall across the Bruttium Peninsula, a massive fortification designed to trap the rebel army through siege and starvation, Spartacus waited for a stormy night. His forces filled a section of the defensive ditch with earth and dead animals, creating a bridge over which the army crossed, breaking through Crassus's supposedly impenetrable barrier. But the escape brought only temporary reprieve. Crassus pursued relentlessly, and now the Senate had dispatched additional legions, Pompey returning from Spain with his victorious army, and Lucullus arriving from Macedonia. Spartacus would soon face over 10 legions, 50,000 professional soldiers converging from multiple directions. The rebellion's final days arrived in the spring of 71 BCE. Spartacus recognized the arithmetic of doom. His forces, exhausted and depleted, couldn't defeat 3 separate Roman armies. Some of his followers again splintered off, seeking individual escape routes. Spartacus let them go, understanding that unity had broken under the weight of desperation. With his remaining loyalists, perhaps 35,000 fighters, Spartacus made one last strategic choice. He would force Crassus into decisive battle before the other Roman armies arrived. Better to die fighting for freedom than to be slowly ground down, or, worse, captured alive and paraded through Rome in chains before inevitable crucifixion. The final battle took place near the Sili River. Ancient sources disagree on exact details, but all concur on the outcome's terrible certainty. Spartacus rallied his forces with words that echoed through history. "Brothers, we've defied Rome for 3 years. We've proven that slaves can defeat legions, that chains cannot bind the determined spirit. Today we fight not for victory, which the gods have denied us, but for honor. We fight so Rome remembers that some slaves refused to kneel." Spartacus personally killed his horse before the battle, declaring that if he won, he'd have plenty of Roman horses to choose from, and if he lost, he wouldn't need one. The gesture electrified his forces, this final rejection of retreat or escape. They would fight as the Spartans had fought at Thermopylae, to the death, making the enemy pay for every inch of ground. The battle opened with Spartacus's forces attacking with desperate fury, trying to overwhelm Crassus's legions through sheer ferocity before the Roman superior discipline and numbers could prevail. The former slaves fought magnificently, pushing through the first lines of Roman defenders, their accumulated years of combat experience evident in every movement. Spartacus himself cut through enemy soldiers like they were grain, his curved sickle blade drawing an arc of death as he drove toward Crassus's position. Ancient historians report he nearly reached the Roman commander, killing 2 centurions who tried to stop him, determination transforming him into something beyond human. But one man, however skilled, cannot defeat an army. The legion's discipline held. Fresh cohorts rotated in to replace exhausted soldiers, a tactical advantage the rebels lacked. Slowly, methodically, the Roman formation compressed Spartacus's forces, closing around them like a tightening fist. Where they'd begun the day as an army, they ended it as a desperate mass of surrounded fighters, backs pressed together, selling their lives dearly. Spartacus died in the final press, though no Roman could later claim the kill with certainty. He disappeared into the chaos of combat, his body lost among thousands of other corpses, denied even the dignity of confirmed death. Perhaps he preferred it that way, becoming myth rather than martyred corpse, his end uncertain, his story incomplete. 6,000 rebels survived the battle, captured by Crassus's forces. The Roman commander wanted his triumph, his victory parade through Rome with living proof of his conquest. But more than that, he wanted a message sent that would echo for generations. Along the Appian Way, the main road from Capua to Rome, Crassus ordered crosses erected. 6,000 crosses stretching for 120 miles. Upon each cross, a captured rebel. The mass crucifixion took days to complete, Roman soldiers methodically nailing former slaves to wooden beams, hoisting them upward, leaving them to die slowly in the Mediterranean sun. The message was brutally clear. This is the price of rebellion. This is what awaits any slave who dreams of freedom. This is Rome's answer to defiance. Travelers on the Appian Way for months afterward walked past the rotting corpses, the empty eye sockets, the skeletal remains of men who dared to break their chains. The smell of death hung over Italy's main thoroughfare, a miasma of decomposition and imperial wrath. Some crosses held men who'd been simple farmers, liberated from bondage, who'd never fought but had followed Spartacus hoping for better lives. Others held veteran gladiators who killed dozens of Romans in honorable combat. All died the same death, distinctions erased in common agony. Yet even in this horror, Spartacus's revolution achieved something profound. Rome's slave-holding aristocracy understood, perhaps for the first time, the precariousness of their position. That the human beings they owned, the people they'd reduced to property and tools, contained within them the capacity to threaten civilization itself when pushed to desperation. Spartacus's body was never identified among the battlefield dead, and that uncertainty transformed him from defeated rebel into eternal legend. Without a corpse to parade or desecrate, Romans couldn't fully claim victory over the man himself, only over his army. The ambiguity allowed myth to flourish. Some said he'd escaped the final battle, disappearing into the countryside to live anonymously, his revolution's fire burning quietly in hidden hearts. Others claimed he descended to join the warrior gods, his defiance too pure for mortal death. The truth mattered less than the symbol. Rome tried to erase Spartacus from history, refusing to grant him the recognition they'd given other worthy enemies like Hannibal. Official records minimized his achievements, attributing victories to lucky circumstances rather than tactical genius. They wanted him forgotten, reduced to a footnote about a minor slave disturbance quickly suppressed. But they'd underestimated how deeply his story would embed itself in human consciousness. In the immediate aftermath, Rome reformed aspects of slave management, understanding that excessive cruelty bred desperate rebellion. Gladiator schools implemented stricter security. Masters were counseled to show calculated mercy that prevented the kind of unified uprising Spartacus had achieved. Fear, properly managed, could maintain order more effectively than constant brutality. Yet the seed had been planted. Across centuries, whenever oppressed people rose against their masters, Spartacus's name emerged as inspiration. When Toussaint Louverture led the Haitian Revolution in 1791, freeing slaves and defeating European armies, he was called the Black Spartacus. When Karl Marx analyzed class struggle and revolution, he cited Spartacus as the true representative of the proletariat, the ultimate revolutionary hero. When the Spartacist League rose in Germany after World War I, they chose their name deliberately, claiming lineage from the Thracian gladiator who defied empire. Even in modern cinema and literature, Spartacus endures as the ultimate symbol of resistance. The 1960 film starring Kirk Douglas became a cultural phenomenon. Its famous climax, where captured slaves each claim, "I am Spartacus," to protect their leader, transforming into a rallying cry for solidarity against oppression. The story transcended its historical moment because it touched something universal: the human refusal to accept dehumanization, the willingness to risk everything for dignity, the recognition that some things matter more than survival. Spartacus lost his war but won his immortality. His tactical brilliance remains studied in military academies, his leadership principles analyzed in management courses, his psychological understanding of how to transform desperate individuals into unified forces examined by sociologists and revolutionaries alike. He proved that social status doesn't determine capability, that slaves could outthink patricians, that the oppressed contain within them all the qualities their oppressors claim as exclusive birthrights. The gladiator revolution's true victory lies not in territory conquered or battles won, but in how it permanently altered the conversation about power, freedom, and human worth. Before Spartacus, slavery was accepted as natural order, questioned only at philosophy's abstract edges. After Spartacus, every slave owner looked at their human property and saw not just potential labor, but potential threat, not just tools, but warriors waiting for their moment. Rome's anxiety about slave rebellions intensified dramatically, leading to increasingly paranoid laws. Masters were forbidden to appear weak before slaves. Households with large slave populations required special security measures. Any slave who raised a hand against their owner, even in self-defense, was executed along with every other slave in the household, collective punishment designed to prevent solidarity. Yet these very measures acknowledged what Spartacus had proven, that the enslaved could organize, could fight, could win. The Third Servile War, as historians would later call it, ended in crushing Roman victory. But it was a Pyrrhic triumph, purchased at enormous cost and revealing fundamental vulnerabilities in Rome's social structure. The rebellion consumed 3 years, destroyed multiple armies, killed tens of thousands of Romans, devastated southern Italy's economy, and required Rome's wealthiest citizen to deploy 8 legions at personal expense to suppress. For 3 years, the world's most powerful military machine was stymied by escaped slaves led by a gladiator. That fact alone ensured Spartacus would never be forgotten. Modern historians debate Spartacus's ultimate goals. Did he genuinely seek to abolish slavery, or merely to free himself and his followers? Did he envision a new social order, or simply wanted to escape the old one? The ancient sources, written by Romans with obvious bias, provide few clear answers. But perhaps the question misses the point. Spartacus's revolution wasn't about creating detailed political philosophy or establishing lasting institutions. It was about the primal human drive to resist subjugation, to assert dignity in the face of dehumanization, to prove that power structures are never as permanent as they appear. When he killed his horse before the final battle, Spartacus declared that the outcome mattered less than the defiance itself. Victory would have been sweet, but impossible wasn't dishonorable. They'd fought. They'd proved slaves could become soldiers, could challenge Rome, could write their own story rather than passively accepting the narrative imposed on them. The 6,000 crosses lining the Appian Way testified to Rome's power, but they also testified to 6,000 individuals who'd chosen freedom over submission, death over chains. Every traveler who passed those crosses and felt horror, every slave who saw them and felt rage, every patrician who viewed them and felt fear, all carried forward Spartacus's true achievement. The demonstration that oppression must be maintained through violence because it cannot be maintained through consent. That the enslaved remain enslaved only through force, not through natural inferiority. That the moment force falters, rebellion ignites. Spartacus transformed himself from property into legend, from entertainment into threat, from slave into symbol, and symbols, unlike men, cannot be crucified.